I'm going to divide my talk today into three sections. I'll first talk briefly about the research base. Secondly, I will talk about the practice of supports for helping people with serious mental illness obtain and keep employment. And third, I want to talk about the stakeholder group that I think we haven't focused enough attention on, and that is the employer. First, what I'm going to do is go over, though, what traditionally has been provided for people in terms of supports for getting to work for people with serious mental illness. And the traditional kinds of services, the characteristics you see featured here are stepwise approach, and that's when we ask people to possibly do pre-vocational training, work adjustment, work activities that help prepare them to go to work. Another characteristic of traditional kinds of programs is having a work readiness criterion in terms of we decide when we think someone is ready for work. A third characteristic is services are brokered, and so the mental health piece and the vocational piece are separate. And the fourth characteristic of traditional kinds of vocational services for people with psychiatric impairments is that the services are short-term, they're time limited. To make sure that we're all on the same page, I wanted to define supported employment. Now, it was back in the Rehabilitation Act amendments of 1986 that supported employment was defined, and originally for people with developmental disabilities, but has since been modified for people with serious mental illness. And you see on your screen here the elements of supported employment. First, these are jobs, regular jobs in the community that people are trying to get, either part-time or full-time. They're jobs that pay at least minimum wage and have the benefits that others doing these jobs have as well. They're not set aside for only people who have disabilities, but they're alongside others who don't necessarily have a disability. And people are provided ongoing supports in order to keep the job. The supports are continued at a level and at a length that's right for that person, what they want and what they need. Supported employment was developed for people who had traditionally been screened out of receiving services because they were seen as not ready to work. But with this approach, people are given the supports in an individualized way to be able to work. Okay, so now I'm going to start with what is the research base for supported employment for people with psychiatric disabilities. Now, there are different levels of research, and the most rigorous level is the randomized controlled trial. On this slide here, you see that I've started out by mentioning day treatment studies. And these studies are when an agency converts their day program resources to supported employment, and what happens. So that would be a whole program changes. And in these studies, in all cases, the employment outcomes of people who are in the day programs that converted to supported employment increased their work outcomes compared to the other agencies that stayed the same. Now, some people thought that there might be negative outcomes by changing agencies in this way, that people might drop out, they may need to go to the hospital, and in these studies, none of those outcomes were found. The one area, though, that people mentioned consistently in these studies is that they missed the socialization opportunities of the day program. And so I think in response to that, in part, peer support programs have developed where people can participate in those programs and socialize with others who have similar experiences that they do. The third item on this slide is the correlational studies, and that's a couple notches down in terms of the type of research. And in those studies, we have found that having good employment outcomes is highly correlated to the implementation process of supported employment and maintaining a faithful implementation to the 15 critical components of supported employment. And then thirdly, there is the randomized controlled trial. And as I mentioned before, that is the most rigorous test of evidence-based practice. And there are now 13 studies of showing that supported employment has better outcomes than more traditional vocational approaches. And those approaches have included pre-vocational training, work adjustment, having work crews, transitional employment positions, short-term jobs. In all cases, it was supported employment that helped people get into jobs, and there was a threefold difference. As you can see across these studies, 60% of the people who were in supported employment gained a regular job, either part-time or full-time, compared to the traditional approaches where only 20% of those people went to work. And in all of the supported employment programs, the competitive employment outcomes were higher than the traditional programs, regardless of age, gender, diagnosis, minority status, whether the programs were urban or rural. Now, in the studies that I've just mentioned, they've been relatively short-term, that is from 12 to 24 months. What happens to people over the long term? What is the pattern of work? And there are now 3 studies that have shown that people get into a career path and do continue on as workers. The 3 studies are from 8 years to 10 years and 12 years, in which people were re-interviewed after being in the original study. And what we found in these 3 studies is that people did go to work. Most of the people worked for pay, regular competitive jobs. Most of them were part-time. In most cases, people tried several jobs before they then settled into a job for more the long term. And so I think the expectation of a person just getting in one job is not realistic. And that, I think, is fairly true for all of us, that we've all had multiple jobs. And so that should also be true for others who have disabilities. Okay, now what I'm going to do is quickly go over the 7 principles of evidence-based supported employment. And again, this is supported employment for people who have psychiatric impairments. The first principle is that eligibility is based on consumer choice. As I mentioned earlier, in the past, our programs were set up in a way that the professionals or the practitioners were the one who determined who could go to work. But what we have found during these studies is that it's actually the consumer who is the one who should be choosing whether they want to participate in supported employment because they have the goal of going to work. I would also suggest that that means that we need to, as practitioners, have higher expectations for people around work, and that we should be talking about work right from the beginning when people knock on doors for receiving services at mental health agencies, right from the beginning during intake, asking people about work. And that all practitioners within the agency are thinking about work for their consumers and with their consumers. The second principle, which has recently been added to this list, is there is now growing evidence that personalized benefits planning is important for people to go back to work. The number one reason why people are ambivalent about going to work is the fear of losing their benefits. And what we're seeing is that with comprehensive, individualized benefits planning, people make decisions in which they do go back to work more and they earn more wages. The third principle is that supported employment is integrated with mental health treatment. And I think what that principle mainly is about is communication, that providers need to all be on the same page about providing supports for people to go back to work. And so to give an example, if you have a psychiatrist who believes that it's important for people to stabilized from their illness and prepare to go to work and not go to work if they're still having any symptoms, that's a very different message from an employment specialist who will say, I think that there are ways that you can go to work and move forward even though you still are having some symptoms. So we need to be sure that we're all on the same page and that we all know what our roles are in supporting people in being able to work. Ways that can happen are having regular treatment team meetings where everybody sits down together and has input on what is happening for individuals and for timely and comprehensive planning. In that way, people will be able to be on the same page and inform each other to provide best services possible. Sharing office space, so people are naturally seeing each other, in which they are able to communicate, and also having a single record. Now, these examples that I just gave you, that's very difficult to do if there are two different agencies that are supporting people in their efforts to work. And in those cases, you're going to have to make extra effort, I think, to make that communication and to link together so you are providing the same message and the consumer isn't the one who has to do the walking to bring all services together. The next principle is that competitive employment is the goal. And I think that there are various discussions about what is a competitive job. And when we use that phrase here, we're talking about regular jobs that anyone can apply for, so they're not set aside specifically for people with disabilities, part-time or full-time, alongside others who may or may not have disabilities, and to help people become more integrated back into their communities. I've sometimes asked, well, what about the person who says, I think I'd like to do that, but I want to start with a volunteer job first. And in that way, I'll build my confidence and see if I can do that. And I think that all these services are really about supporting individuals and what they want, and if that's how that person wants to get started, we should help them do that and keep them thinking about a regular job. Now, if everybody is getting a volunteer job on someone's caseload, I would then say the focus is not on competitive employment, but I think we do want to have individualized services. If the person says, I only want to do volunteer work, I don't want to be paid, I'm worried about it jeopardizing my benefits, or that's just how I want it to be for me, then I think that we should save the precious resources of the employment specialist for people who are really aiming toward competitive employment. Next principle is that the job search starts soon after a consumer expresses interest in working. And so we want to meet with a person when they are ready to think about work and not slow them down with our programming by having pre-vocational training or extended work adjustment kinds of activities. Now, that said, these supported employment services go at a rate that's consistent for that individual. There'll be some people who want to get started right away, have a good idea what they want to do, and may even get the job within a couple weeks. Someone else may say, I don't want to go that fast, let's take a look at different jobs, and so the employment specialist goes out with that person and they start learning more about the world of work in order for that individual to zero in on the kinds of job settings that they might be able to get a job and do well in. So the pace is really determined by the individual, but within the first month of being part of supported employment, the consumer is helped to start thinking about the world of work and getting out of the office to do that. The sixth principle is that follow-along supports are continuous, so there are not time time limits in this approach. And so if there are different agencies that are putting together this service, they need to think about, well, how are the long-term services going to be provided, and importantly, how are they going to be funded? I think in the past, services have been time limited in part because of financing mechanisms. Supports are individualized, again, and they're also provided by the whole team. So this is an approach where it's just adding an employment specialist who's going to help somebody with their getting to work. It's about a whole team of people thinking about how to support that person in getting to work. And that also can include family members if the individual wants, significant others, other people that they have in their lives. And the seventh principle is that consumer preferences are important. This is all based on who the person is and what they want to do and how we're going to help them do that. So the employment person is not going to provide an array of jobs. You know, I have a package of all these jobs available, which one makes sense for you. It's starting with who the individual is. What are their skills? What are their past experiences, and what do they want to do now? How to put that all together, and then find that out in the community in a job setting that's going to fit for that person. Now, what we have found in many studies is that most people have realistic job expectations, and in all cases, what I would recommend is that it's important to ask people, what is it about that job preference that you like? And to continue to broaden options for people rather than limiting them. Okay, now what I want to do is talk about a few other important issues that will lead us into thinking about the employer and critical issues related to the employer in the work setting. And the first area that we need to talk about is whether a person wants to disclose that they have a disability. And with the Americans with Disabilities Act, employers are required, most employers are required to provide reasonable accommodations for people who have disabilities, so they will be able to work. And what that means, though, I think is different for different people. And I can remember talking to one consumer who thought that meant, well, you're going to hand over my chart to the employer. That's really not what we're talking about here. It's whether an individual will be willing to disclose that they have a disability, but conversations about that disability may never even come up with the employer, but it allows the employment specialist to have contact with an employer and to advocate for that individual getting the job and supporting the job if the individual wants. We have found in several studies that about half the consumers with mental illness who are part of supported employment programs initially don't want to disclose, and so they don't want the employment specialist contacting specific employers on their behalf, which is fine, but then the employment specialist needs to support that person behind the scenes and at a level that that person wants. Other people will say, I think it will be helpful if you are there to help to advocate for me. Individuals may have a hard time explaining certain periods of their past. They may have a difficult time even thinking about the kinds of accommodations that might help them otherwise get the job and be able to stay in the job. So the discussions about disclosure, I think, really need to be ongoing. What do we really mean by that? What are we going to say to people? Who's going to say, describe information to the employer? Does anything need to be said to coworkers? It's all about really need to know information. And in my experience and being familiar with lots of programs is that it's not necessary to get into discussions about diagnoses. It's more about behavioral needs that people may have. And I'm going to talk in a few minutes about accommodations that are related to this. So supported employment and helping people with psychiatric impairments work is all about thinking about this individualized job search. And so if everybody is working at a fast food chain, then I would say this is probably not an individualized job search, because most people that isn't their goal. If I go and visit a program and ask where people are working and talk to consumers who are working, and they tell me that they're all in different kinds of jobs, working different amounts of time during the week, then I have a better idea that this really is an individualized job search approach. Okay, so it's very important for the employment specialist who is going to be contacting employers to think about, what do I need to do in terms of engaging employers, and what do I want to come out of my contact with employers? And again, for the employment specialist who's advocating for a specific person, it needs to be someone who says and agree that they're willing to disclose that they have a disability. And it may be merely because the employment specialist needs to say what organization they work for, which would then naturally reveal that they may be working for on behalf of people who have a serious mental illness. For example, if they work for an agency where in the title it says Community Mental Health Center, then some level of disclosure is occurring when they say where they work. For those people that they are not advocating for, employment specialists still may have direct contact with employers, because one of their main roles is to become familiar with the employer community and to be able to know what employers want, who they want to hire, what skills they're looking for, what needs to be done in their business to be successful. And so what is their workforce that they're looking for? I have gone out with lots and lots of employment specialists, and it really can vary how that happens. But in all cases, the employment specialists who develop working relationships with employers, they have really done their homework, and they present professionally. They know what they want to say to the employer, and they're confident in the way they do it. They know that they're really there to help solve an employer problem, and they want to recommend qualified applicants. So it behooves them to really find out, what is the employer looking for? Are there certain jobs that they tend to have turnover? Why is that? Or maybe there is a specific job that the employer needs filled right now. I think sometimes what happens is people who are new to being employment specialists, the tendency is to go in and ask, do you have any job openings? The employer oftentimes will say no, and the employment specialist will say thank you very much and leaves. And I think what we want employment specialists to do is really to be able to open up conversations with employers and to get them talking, and simple questions that will give a yes or no answer tend to shut down the conversation. Respect the employer's time, and so let's say you have someone who's interested in working in a restaurant, has skills of being a cook in the past, lives nearby a restaurant that they think they might like to work, and so you and the individual are job searching together. You want to think, well, what's the best time to go meet that employer? And it wouldn't be in the middle of when they're serving meals. So if it's a dinner restaurant, obviously you're not going to want to go at 5 or 6 o'clock, but at a time that's more convenient for that employer. In all your contacts with the employer, you want to keep in mind, what is the next step? What do I want to have be the outcome of this contact? Sometimes it's just merely to make yourself familiar with that individual. It may be because you want that person to meet a candidate for that position. And it may be that you want to say, well, I understand that you may not have anything right now, but I'm going to check back with you in a month. And so I really see that employment specialists who continue to go back with and meet employers and groom those relationships, that they are the people who are ending up giving employer recommendations to their clients who are looking for jobs, or actually helping clients get the jobs more directly with employers. You'll see on this slide the last item that says, be dependable, do what you say you're going to do. And I can't emphasize how important that is. It's really clear as I see employment specialists working with employers that when I go back and talk to employers, they will say, I can always count on that employment specialist. She says what she's going to do. She's always there for me. And that clearly is an important quality. I'm sometimes asked, well, where is the consumer in this? And want to remind people to think about that we encourage people to do as much as possible of this as they can on their own, and that employment specialists are there to support people in an individualized way that's going to help them. And so it may be that the employment specialist is not going to be contacting the employer. It may be that they're going to be contacting and working with the employer in the beginning to help set up the employment opportunity, make recommendations for accommodations, and it may be that they'll just back off and ask to touch base every few weeks. It's all going to vary. But they need to have a planful way of connecting with employers, and typically back off over time because the person is able to do the job. I think many people who are living with symptoms of mental illness find that it can be stigmatizing to have a professional meet them on the job. So it may be that really the support is going to be provided off the setting where the work is being done. Other tips that I can recommend, and this is partly having been an employment specialist, though it was a long time ago, but now I learned from people, probably many of you who are doing this work, is that it's important to use assertive language and be confident when you're talking to employers. Avoid words such as you see there, could or might or maybe. That it's very important for the employment specialist, if you're advocating on behalf of individuals, that you recognize what those skills are of that person and what their special talents are, so you can talk with employers about that. If you don't believe that your person can work and you really don't believe that this is possible, I guarantee that is going to be conveyed in one way or another to the employer. And so they're going to wonder, is this somebody I really want to hire? Now, that said, I think it's also true that we can't make guarantees. And but what your job is, and the job of the team, is to know who your individual is that you're working with and help them identify what their strengths are and help them figure out how to advocate for themselves so they can show what they can offer to an employer. It may be that through work, the individual learns that having morning hours aren't going to work for them, and the job may end because of that, or because they're uncomfortable working in a very crowded setting that's very fast-paced. Well, that's okay. I think that we want to learn from each of our job experiences and then move forward to maybe a situation that might be better for us. But at the same time, we want to work with employers and advocate for what we believe in about the person and be there for the employer if it doesn't work out, and that's what the individual wants us to do. Make a follow-up contact. I sometimes talk to employers and they'll say, well, this employment specialist was there and I thought this was great and I liked the person that they were advocating for and we got the job, but then they never showed up again, and then there were problems and I wasn't sure what I should do or handle it. And so I encourage employment specialists, if you are having contact with employers, ask them what would be helpful and work together with the employer, the employee, and the employment specialist. Also, you can recommend other employers who have hired people with disabilities or have worked with other employment specialists so they can hear from their peers that this is really an untapped workforce and that this can be positive. As you're contacting employers, there may be questions that the employer has, and so be prepared for these questions. For example, if you're advocating for an individual and that person is not with you, the employer may simply say, well, why is that person not with you? I have actually been with employment specialists who've gone with an applicant and talked to an employer, but it was the employment specialist who did all the talking. And the employer said, well, can this person not talk? Can they not, tell me what they want? And so, it's important to think about those things. The employer may ask, well, what is your role and what do you do? And are there fees for this service? They may have, the employee applicant may have a resume, but a common question is, are there gaps, or what are these gaps in the resume and the work history? And it's important that the individual has an answer for that, and what do they want to say? What are the reasons for that? And ultimately, this is all about can the person do the job? So, stay focused on, what's in this for the employer. It's to get the job done. Also, encourage you not to use, mental health jargon that really use business language, that employers aren't terribly interested about issues that people have and their goals, and they're interested in hiring people who will get the job done. So as an employment specialist, you can offer certain services to the employer that will benefit them, such as you offer actually a pre-screening service because you have become familiar with this individual and you know a little bit about them. And this is more than most employers have when they meet applicants for a position. You've also been able to collect some information about the person's skills and their strengths, and been able to develop a vocational profile and be able to convey that information to the employer. You can provide simple education and guidance about accommodations for the employer. Also, for some people, maybe short-term job coaching is what will be helpful to get that person started on the job. But the job coach or the employment specialist wants to, from the start with the employee, thinking about how that person will fade away. It makes me think about an example of one employment program where the employment specialist started with an employee on a job cleaning, doing maintenance work, and stayed with that person. And this went on for actually months. And what became clear was that actually the employment specialist really was the one who was doing the job, and it wasn't a job that the individual wanted or could do, actually, and some of it is because of the speed that was required. And so, step back, whose job is it, and make sure that this is something that, you're constantly talking about, how to get the job done and can the person do it. And it may be that was not I think in that example, it was not a good job match for that person. But they did go on and took what they learned from that job and then went forward with another job. Okay, the Work Opportunities Tax Credit. This is an incentive that I understand that some employers are interested in and will make a difference on whether they hire someone or not. And for other employers, it really isn't as much of an incentive. But that is where the employee is encouraged to hire certain groups of people, and they will then have a reduced federal tax liability for certain qualified employees up to $2,400. Another benefit to employers is that the employment specialists can provide support, and they can be in touch with the employer to make sure everything's going okay. Obviously, if this is part of what the consumer wants to do. Okay, and now I'd like to just describe some of the reasonable accommodations that have been used to help people with severe mental illness maintain jobs and keep jobs. And as you will see as we go through this list, that most of these accommodations are not expensive, they don't cost a lot of money, and are relatively easy to put in place. The first one that you see is a temporary job coach, and that may be to help someone get started on the job, that they have not worked in a long time, they're nervous about getting to work again, and that having a job coach there to help smooth the way is important. For an individual who may have trouble with memory, it may be a simple job accommodation by having written instructions on job tasks that they are supposed to complete. That is helpful. It may be just a piece of paper where it's all outlined what that person is going to do. It may be helpful to have somebody to work alongside with. For example, a accommodation for someone who has fearful thoughts. One person may feel safer if their workstation is a little more separate from the mainstream of where lots of people are working in an office. For someone else, it may be most helpful to feel safe and be able to control these thoughts by having a coworker buddy to be able to check out and make sure that everything is okay. Sometimes having a change in a supervisor can make a big difference for people in terms of who they have to relate to. That's a simple change that can be made. And then also, by simply having positive reinforcement that someone is doing a good job. I can remember when I used to do this work, working with an individual who had no trouble at all finding jobs. But what happened when she started working is that she tended to think that her supervisor was thinking that she wasn't doing a good job. And she would become tearful and end up leaving the job. And this happened a series of times. And so we decided that maybe if we could ask the supervisor to point out each day to her something positive that she did, that she would be reinforced on how she was doing. And this simple accommodation made all the difference for her, and was able to keep the job for a long time. Other examples of accommodations are around scheduling. People who want part-time hours. They want to have, it's more helpful to them to have a self-paced workload. For some people, having more frequent breaks helps them to keep working. For others, it may be that it's unavoidable that they need to have clinic appointments during their work hours, and so trying to make a change for those appointments. And for some people who may need a hospitalization, having paid or unpaid leave for that. Other accommodations may have to do specifically with a work setting. People who take medications may have side effects of dry mouth, and so it's important for them to feel comfortable with having liquids regularly, so having access to water. For the individual who may need to have a place for them to relax after having a difficult time, that may be an easy situation to set up. For example, I remember visiting a furniture store where an employee, a consumer, had been hired, and what his job was to unload a lot of the furniture that would come in on big trucks and help it set up in the showroom. But at times, he had auditory hallucinations. He would become overwhelmed by the voices and start feeling agitated and uncomfortable. And what was helpful for him was for his supervisor to suggest that he go in a separate room in the back and take some time to himself, and when he felt better, come back out again. And so these breaks that would be no more than 5 minutes were helpful to him, and that was what really made a difference in him being able to keep the job. Other examples is making changes in a workstation that might work better for an individual, removing or reducing distractions that people may have that makes it difficult for them to work. Sometimes people have used headsets for people who have auditory hallucinations or even white noise. There are also reasonable accommodations that could be put in place for the actual work tasks, providing opportunity for additional training or for a gradual increase in job duties. It may be dividing the job up, and so there's job sharing, and restructuring jobs with the essential job features. When jobs end, sometimes it's for good reasons, and sometimes it's for not so good reasons. And when people move on to better jobs and they're developing their careers, that's a good thing. When sometimes people leave jobs, they may leave them, or they may even be fired for reasons because it didn't work out for them. Oftentimes that's difficult. It's not pleasant to leave jobs that when it hasn't worked out. So it's the role of the practitioners and the employment specialists to help that person review what was learned from that job and what will we do differently to move forward. I'm often asked about the different kinds of jobs that people get into, and you know, as I've been saying throughout this presentation, that this really is an individualized job approach. And so if you are seeing people get different kinds of jobs, then you know that that's what you're doing. I made a list of jobs from one of the programs that I am familiar with, and you can see that the jobs are in diverse settings, and they're different types of jobs. And that is really what we want to aim for, helping people with serious mental illness get it back into the workforce. So what are the roles of different people? The role of the employment specialist is to help engage people around work, listen to them and who they are and what they want, to be able to help them move forward. Help develop a vocational profile that includes work experiences that they had, what their talents and skills are, who they know now, try to network to find a situation that's going to be good for them. Other roles, obviously, putting together a good job match, helping people to manage their symptoms that they may be experiencing because of their illness. even though someone is having symptoms, that doesn't mean that they necessarily have to stop the job. There are ways to overcome that, and working with that individual to do that are helpful. Educating employers, helping people to manage interpersonal issues that they may have on the job is very key. What to say to coworkers during times of breaks may be different, very different for them, particularly for people who have spent much of their recent time in day programs. Providing individualized follow-along supports. What are the role of consumers? What is your work plan? Consumers, please request information about benefits and what's it going to mean if you go to work. Be involved in identifying jobs that you want. Be involved in the job search. This is all about you. And connect with your peers who have gone through this, particularly if you're unsure if you want to do this, because lots of people have gone to work and have moved forward in their lives through work. What is your particular support plan? What will be helpful to you may be different than what it is for somebody else. The role of the supervisor for the employment specialist at the mental health agency or the rehab agency is also key. They need to be overseeing what kinds of job matches are being made. It's most helpful if they also go out with employment specialists to connect with employers. And I think this is a relatively new idea, and some employment supervisors are even a little bit nervous about doing it. But those that do go out and do it, we have seen end up having programs where more and more people are going to work. And I think that it's a lot of that has to do with their role in supporting their staff in supporting consumers getting jobs. Focus on outcomes. Are people getting jobs? And help your staff focus on that as well. And are they following the critical components of supported employment that will help them get jobs? Employers clearly have a role in this. They're looking for qualified applicants. It's helpful for them to be open to learn ways to support all their employees. Having a diverse workforce, I think, is a good thing, and that employers need to think about how to do that. And employment specialists are there and can help them with that. I also encourage employers to talk to other employers, to talk about this untapped workforce of people who have disabilities, who are and can be good workers. And finally, just want to say that employers do have positive things to say. Johnson & Johnson company believes in this and is supporting evidence-based supported employment in 11 states right now, indirectly by providing a gift for this to happen in these states. And then there are smaller employers like Dee's Magnolia in Roseburg, Oregon, who says that having an employment specialist has been very helpful, and that hiring people who have a disability like mental illness has not been a problem. And I find that that worker has been just as good as other workers that I have in my restaurant. And also like people to think about that while there are probably lots of people in most employment settings who have disabilities of one sort or another, and they may just not disclose it. And so we need to be more inclusive in our workforce. I've just listed here a few resources for you, and welcome the next section of this as a discussion about questions or thoughts you might have about these comments. Thank you very much.